Good morning, everybody. Today we are starting the new session on central nervous system. To start with, I will give you a rough sketch of working system of central nervous system. Central nervous system executes the action in the form of either muscle contraction or glandular secretion. Now for this, it will either receive a stimulus from surrounding or we will have idea in the mind to do something. For example, now this is a part of skin which will receive sensations from the surrounding. Now this will be carried to the spinal cord through this nerve. So that's why it is called as sensory nerve. Sometimes response comes immediately from the spinal cord, from this nerve which is called as a motor nerve. This nerve is called as a motor nerve. Now it will go to the muscle. So this is the reflex response arising from the stimulus, going to the spinal cord through sensory nerve, coming back from the spinal cord through motor nerve to the muscle. So this is called as simple reflex arc. But sometimes a response is complicated. So for this, it needs coordination from the higher center. So once a stimulus is coming from skin to the spinal cord, information will travel to the higher center. Now you can see it is traveling to the higher center. Now this is called as ascending track, which is carrying information from the spinal cord to the higher center. So this center is called as sensory cortex, as it is receiving a sensory information. So this is one way of stimulation of central nervous system through receptor, sensory nerve, ascending track. It will reach the sensory cortex. Okay, this is one. Second, you have got some idea in the mind to do something. For example, I want to have a cup of tea. So I will need contraction of my muscles. So that is idea in the mind. Or I want to write something on my board. So this idea in the mind will come. So either idea or impulse coming from sensory cortex. Now both of these need some action now. Okay. So this action plan is now generated in the cortical association area, premotor cortex and motor cortex. So here basically there is a planning for execution of action. Getting this? Either from sensory cortex, which is coming from the lower one, or idea in the mind. Okay. Now both of this will go to the motor cortex, premotor cortex, cortical association area. So here now there will be planning of execution of action. But from here it will not directly now jump back to spinal cord. It takes opinion from its two siblings. One basal ganglion. So impulse will go to the plan of action will go to the basal ganglion. It will give its opinion now how to execute the action. Second sibling, that is cerebellum. So that is why both of these are called as motor coordination center. Okay. So planning of action is coming from motor cortex, but for the execution, opinions are taken from basal ganglion and cerebellum. So both will reply back to motor cortex. What type of action, how much should be the rate of contraction, how much should be the muscle tone. This all will be decided by the basal ganglion and cerebellum. That's why whenever we have got a disorder of either basal ganglion or cerebellum, we will have incoordination of movement or difficulty in movement, not paralysis. Okay. Now from the motor cortex, now impulse will travel down to the execution center, that is spinal cord. Through this track, now this track is called as descending track or motor track, which will carry information from spinal cord, from motor cortex to the spinal cord. Now here we are having our three important nucleus which will carry out the action, which we will be learning today. So either impulse comes directly from spinal cord down to directly from the cortex to the spinal cord. Sometimes it takes a station in between called as brainstem. So impulse will come from motor cortex to the brainstem. We have got some nucleus here. From here impulse will come down again to the spinal cord. So these are called as indirect tracts because they are taking a station in between, and this is called as direct tract. Okay. So this is So we'll be learning in detail regarding this during our subsequent lectures regarding spinal cord, basal ganglion, motor cortex, sensory nerve and cerebellum. I'll be dealing mainly with the sensory part. I will take today first spinal cord, functional anatomy. Then I will discuss regarding ascending tract, sensations and different sensation of sensory cortex. Okay. Now to start with, this is our spinal cord. This is the brainstem. This is the cortex. So I will be dealing today with the spinal cord. So this is the spinal cord. If you take a section of spinal cord, classically you have learned in your 12th standard. This is the nerve, which will consist of two parts. This is called as a peripheral nerve. Okay. Now this is our spinal cord. You can see it is divided into major four segments: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral and coccygeal. Okay. Like this, in each we are having some divisions. You can see 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral and 1 coccyx. So like this we are having 31 spinal segments either side. You can see these are the spinal nerve. Now this will consist of both part, sensory as well as motor part. Okay. You can see in this diagram, same I have taken. This is overall spinal cord, which is collecting nerves from lower part of the body, the abdomen, chest and the upper part of body. Now we'll take a section of the spinal cord. Now you can see classically two colors are visible, gray and white. Okay. This is called as a gray matter, simple. This is called as a white matter. Okay. This is the main division of spinal cord. Based on the locations, this is the anterior part, this is the posterior part, this is the lateral part. Now, internal organization of spinal cord, gray matter and white matter. Now, this gray matter consists of mainly neurons, neuroglia. These are the supporting cells of neuron. They support the nourishment, protection, like that. And unmyelinated axons and dendrites. So the gray matter is gray in color because of presence of neurons, neuroglia and unmyelinated axons and dendrites. Now we'll see what the neurons are basically. You can see this is the classical structure of a neuron. Now they are divided into 3 categories based on their functions physiologically. You can see these are the sensory receptors. Now if the impulse is carried from the receptor towards the nerve, it is called as sensory nerve. Okay, simple name, sensory neuron. Because it is, you can see it is carrying information from the skin towards the upper one. So it is called as sensory neuron. Okay. Now this is carrying information from the neuron towards the muscle. Okay. And where we are having a movement. So that's why it is called as a motor neuron. Okay, got the difference? Sensory neuron collecting information from the surrounding and motor neuron is giving information for the execution. That's motor neuron. Third category of neuron, this is called as interneuron. It is connecting the two neurons. Okay. So here you can see in this spinal cord, from here sensation is carried and that is coming to the spinal cord. So this neuron which is carrying the information is called as sensory neuron. This neuron which is carrying information towards the muscle for movement, it is called as a motor neuron. And third category which is connecting the two, it is called as interneuron. Okay. So these are present in the spinal cord and this combined forms a nerve. So it is called as a peripheral nerve. So sensory information, as I mentioned, is coming to the spinal cord. Sometimes, as I have mentioned, it is going to the upper one. So some sensory neurons arise from here. Okay, this is the simple reflex arc. So some neurons are again formed here which will carry the information to the up. This we have seen the ascending tract. So this neuron is called as sensory relay neuron, which is carrying information from the spinal cord to the up. Okay. So like this, neurons are sensory relay neuron, motor neurons, and interneuron. So the gray matter consists of the neurons of three categories: sensory relay neuron, motor neurons, and interneurons. So from here, ascending tract is arising. Okay. Now the motor neurons category, we'll see now what the motor neurons are. This is our dissection of a muscle. We have learned in the physiology of skeletal muscle, okay, we are having acting myosin filaments in the muscle. So this types of fiber which consist of mainly acting myosin filament in dominant, these are called as extrafusal fibers. These are the main contractile element of a muscle. Whenever there is a nerve stimulation, muscle contracts by the contraction of extrafusal fibers. Apart from this, inside the muscle there are some fibers which are having very less quantity of acting myosin filament. These are called as intrafusal fibers. Basically, they are sensory receptors. You can see this yellow. So sensory nerve is arising from the muscle from the intrafusal fibers. These are also called as muscle spindle. Okay, so these are nothing but sensory receptors present in a muscle. So this is the muscle spindle. From here, our sensory nerve is arising from the muscle. Just like from the skin, sensation of touch, pain, temperature is carried by sensory nerve. Similarly, inside the muscle, sensation of change in muscle length is carried from the muscle spindle. Okay, so this nerve is collecting information and taking to the spinal cord. Okay, now once impulse reaches the spinal cord, now here what is happening? See, the sensory nerve. Okay, now from here the motor nerve arises, which is supplying to the extrafusal fibers for the muscle contraction. Now this motor neuron, from here impulse is going there. This motor neuron is called as alpha motor neuron. This is the chief neuron which is supplying the muscle. This is a very, very important neuron. From here all the motor execution takes place. Okay. Now this muscle spindle, which is having intrafusal fiber, but it is having very small quantity of acting myosin filament. It is supplied by this nerve, which is green. This is called as gamma motor neuron. Okay, so alpha motor neuron stimulation leads to muscle contraction, but gamma motor neuron stimulation will lead to only contraction of muscle spindle. Muscle will not contract. Okay, so like this, motor neurons present in spinal cord are sensory relay neuron, motor neurons, and interneurons. And in motor neurons, two categories. One is alpha motor neuron, which is supplying the extrafusal fibers. It is also called as anterior horn cell, also called as final common pathway, because whatever stimulation is coming from the cortex, from brainstem, from descending tract, ultimate execution is coming from alpha motor neuron. So that's why it is also called as final common pathway. Okay, and interneurons, these are highly excitable cells which exhibit spontaneous activity. Okay, so now here you can see reflex arc, muscle spindle, which consists of intrafusal fibers, sensory nerve. This is our alpha motor neuron. This is our gamma motor neuron, which is supplying the intrafusal fibers. Okay. Now classically, whenever you are giving stimulation to the muscle, like this, you are stretching a muscle, giving a tap. Because of this, there is change in muscle length. And you give a tap to the muscle, you are changing muscle length. Now this is being sensed by muscle spindle. Action potential generated. Okay. Now this will travel from spinal cord and impulse will come back, muscle will show contraction. This is called as reflex action. Okay. So this reflex action is because of sensory impulse generated at the muscle spindle. Impulse will travel. Okay. Impulse will travel from the sensory nerve. It will stimulate alpha motor neuron and so muscle will show contraction. Okay. And sometimes, as I mentioned, ideas coming in the mind. Impulse will generate in the motor area. This will take opening from basal ganglion and cerebellum and continue. not enough space boron.